Okay, we are on 19b3. Okay, at the bottom, the Yutet Amud Bet, the Gemara says, Amar Rav Asi. Rav Asi said, in the name of Rav Yochanan, Ma'aser Sheni me'emata hayavim alav. Ma'aser Sheni, when it comes to this Ma'aser that we've been talking about, that a person has an obligation to be able to eat in Yerushalayim, or to redeem and use the money to eat in Yerushalayim. The Gemara says, at what point does a person become obligated to separate the Ma'aser Sheni? Right? Stanley, thank you so much. The question is, Stanley, at what point does a person become obligated to separate Ma'aser Sheni? The Gemara says, not separate it. At what point is a person chayav for eating it inappropriately? So after you were supposed to have separated it, okay? So you have an obligation to eat in Yerushalayim. At what point do you get Malkut, right? That we talked about before. At what point do you get the Malkut for having this Ma'aser Sheni? You're obligated to eat in Yerushalayim outside. Gemara says, Misha Pnei Choma. Once the Ma'aser Sheni was already in Yerushalayim, okay? So once it entered the city, if a person then takes the Ma'aser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim, so at that point, that's the Chiyuv Malkut that we're speaking about. Baruch atah Adonai, l'nei melech haolam, she'akol nהיה baro. Amen. But like we said earlier, if a person never brought it to Yerushalayim, then it's not Ma'aser Sheni. It's produce that has an obligation to be separated as Ma'aser Sheni, but it's not actually Ma'aser Sheni, okay? So the Gemara says, but the minute it's Mishra'a Pnei Chomot Yerushalayim, once it's already gone into Yerushalayim, so it's been exposed to Yerushalayim, so now it's considered the Ma'aser Sheni of Jerusalem. It's not just the produce that's supposed to be. It's now transferred into Ma'aser Sheni. Now, if you eat it outside of Yerushalayim, you get Malkut because that is its correct place to eat it. For Esther Gemara, my Ta'ama, what's the reason? The Pasuk says, you're supposed to eat it in front of Hashem, your God. Like we mentioned, this is that OG Pasuk that we keep quoting. Shana b'shana, you have to eat it each year. The Gemara says, Uchtiv, and therefore it says, so the Pasuk says that the obligation is to eat it in Yerushalayim. That's the Hashem Elokecha Dochelenu. Uchtiv lo tuchal lecho b'sharecha. The pasuk says you can eat outside of Yerushalayim at your gates. In other words, if you live in Ranana, kol echad karinan be lefnei Hashem Elokecha Dochelenu. Once we have the ability to call Ma'aser Sheni lefnei Hashem Dochelenu, i.e., if it got to Jerusalem, karinan be, we could have the negative commandment of lo tochelenu, lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha. You can't eat it outside in your gates, wherever your gates might be, because it already fulfilled the first part, which is that it saw the gates of Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim. If you never were able to have the positive commandment, it never got to that point where it was considered in front of Hashem Tochelenu, i.e., it never made it to Jerusalem. So in that case, I can't get Malkut for Lo Tuchal Echol B'Sharecha. So one more time, the guy lives in Ranana. His produce is Ranana. He needs to come now to Jerusalem in order to make it Ma'aser Sheni. Once he enters with the produce into Jerusalem, now there's an obligation not to eat it outside of Jerusalem. But until
it's stuck there, so to speak, you have to eat it.
You have to eat it there. But if the produce never made it up to Jerusalem, I'm still living in Ranana with my produce that grew in my backyard. That's not Ma'aser Sheni. That's produce that needs to have Ma'aser Sheni taken from it. Is everyone understanding this idea?
Yeah, even if it's separated.
Let me give you a simple mashal, okay? Let's say I make money, okay? I make $100. How much money do I owe to Ma'aser? $10, okay. Now, if I use any of those dollars for myself, did I steal that money from Ma'aser? From a poor person? No, it's all my money. Right? Once I take the $10 and I designate it as Ma'aser, if I use that money, I'm spending the money of Aniyim. Is that clear? You can't take Ma'aser money and use it for yourself. But until it's designated as Ma'aser money, it's all my money. I just owe 10%.
You didn't do the mitzvah yet.
Exactly. Okay. Says the Gemara. And the Gemara brings the Pesukim which illustrate this point.
I have one question. Is it the same level of an Averah if you, let's say, don't do the mitzvah of separating the Maaser Sheni in Ranana versus if you made it the Maaser to Yerushalayim, but you just don't actually give it?
You mean if you set it aside?
Yeah.
No. So clearly here from the pasuk, even though you set it aside, it does not become Maaser Sheni Lifnei Hashem Elokecha until it gets to Jerusalem. So until you have this food is Lifnei Hashem Elokecha, now it can't be taken out.
But even if you went to Yerushalayim, but then you went back to Ranana with it and you didn't do it, I'm saying, is it the same level of the sin?
What do you mean if you went to Yerushalayim?
You went to Yerushalayim
with the Maaser Sheni. Yeah.
You turned around, you did a U-turn.
Yeah, went back home.
You went back home with the Maaser Sheni.
Yeah, that's the case with Asur.
So it's both as Asur.
That is the specific case he's talking about. Okay. I'm not sure
I want to know if you
what did you think we were talking about?
If you never go to Yerushalayim and you never separate, is it the same level of punishment?
If you never go to Yerushalayim, there's no punishment at all.
No punishment at all?
Yeah.
If you didn't do the mitzvah?
No, there's a punishment for not having separated Maaser Sheni. But I never ate Maaser Sheni.
It's a different level.
Because it's not Maaser Sheni. It's my own produce.
Okay, got it.
Okay? I may be eating what's called tevel, which means produce that should have had something separated from it. Okay?
When we talk about the Jerusalem borders, are those defined? Can a king change them, or can they expand over time?
It's a very good question. Generally, the concept of the borders of Yerushalayim are set in stone. That was a terrible, unwitting pun. Sorry, but the borders of Jerusalem are set in stone. There's a wall around Yerushalayim. Now, but it's not just the wall around Yerushalayim that creates the wall of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is Yerushalayim because that was the portion that was apportioned, if you remember, to Binyamin. Right? We already talked about that. How did each Shevet get the space that they were supposed to get? That happened by a goral. So there was a dividing up of the space. That was by the lottery that Hashem gave to each tribe and each Shevet. The Gemara says, Metre. Let's ask a question on Rabbi Yochanan. So who's Rabbi Yochanan? This Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan that we just started with, okay? Metre, it says a Braita, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi says, Kohen sha'alta biyado te'ena shel tevel. Let's say you have a Kohen. He picks up, he's got he's holding in his hand a te'ena, a fig of tevel. What's tevel? Tevel is unseparated produce. So this is what we're talking about. The guy's in Ranana, all he has is his produce. So now Kohen picks up the produce and he says, te'ena zu tirumata be'ukza. Okay? He says, let this fig that I'm holding in my hand, okay? Tirumata, the tiruma of the fig should be be'ukza. It should be at the bottom of the fig. Maaser rishon bitzfona. The maaser rishon of the fig that I have here should be in the northern part. Maaser sheni lidroma. The maaser sheni should be in the southern part of the fig. Vishnat maaser sheni. It's the year that you have maaser sheni. V'hu b'Yerushalayim, and he's in Yerushalayim. Okay? Or maaser ani v'hu b'gvulin. Or it's maaser ani, and he is not only Yerushalayim, but he's in any of the cities outside of Yerushalayim. Okay? Achela, if he ate this fig, loke achat, he gets a penalty, he gets a malkut, right, for eating tevel. Now, let's just be clear. This is the fig. Okay, I'm holding it in my hand. The top of he says, see, this is what happens when you try and separate terumah bizman hazeh. Okay. He's holding the fig like this, and he says, he's designating, and this, by the way, is how we designate terumot and ma'asrot today. If you see, go to an expert, this is how they do it. They point with their finger, this part of the loaf, this part of the loaf. So, as an example, he picks up the fig, the Kohen, and the Kohen says, Mechila, right? The ukza, the bottom of the fig, okay, that should be that's teruma. Then maaser rishon is tzafon, and maaser sheni is the south. Okay, so this is the north, this is the south. So he's basically taken one fig, and he's designated an area of the fig to be each one of these maasrot. Why? Because the concept of many of these maasrot is a portion, a small portion. Let's say it's a 60th. Now, if you have an entire crop, so you're not setting aside one fig and drawing lines on the fig. But if the Kohen now has one fig of tevel, which means it's not been separated, then how much is 1/60th of a fig? A small amount, right? So now he's saying, this is teruma, this is maaser rishon, this is maaser sheni, okay? Now, just so we're clear, what the Gemara means, what the Braita means is that maaser sheni alternates. The different years in the 7-year cycle, you have some years which are given to maaser ani, and some which are given to maaser sheni. Maaser ani is when the maaser goes to a poor person. Maaser sheni means when you eat it, but it just has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Okay? So
Maaser Rishon is what?
Maaser Rishon is the first element of maaser, which goes to the Kohanim. Okay?
So what's the difference between the Rishon and the Sheni?
So sheni alternates between Yerushalayim and you have maaser ani.
So Rishon is always there. And
Rishon is always there, and
Sheni
Sheni alternates. Yeah, okay? So the Gemara says as follows. Now, in each case, right, even though I gave Maaser, I did not do Tirumat Maaser. Tirumat Maaser means that of the Maaser, there's a portion of Tirumah. So we're talking about something. Tevel means something which has not yet been separated from. That's the concept of Tevel. Okay, so the Kohen took something which was a virgin fig, right? It's nothing been done with it, and he starts drawing these lines. Okay, now the Gemara says, what happens if he eats that fig? Lokeachat, he gets one level of malkut. Why? Because he did not separate Trumat Maaser. So the fig is considered eating tevel. Vizar she'achela lokeshetayim, and a zar, a non-Kohen, a Yisrael, that eats shtayim. Why? One is because he has, as we said, he did not separate Trumat Maaser, right? So therefore it's tevel. It's a fruit which has not yet had the things separated from it. So like I said earlier, eating tevel gets malkut, okay? However, there's a second penalty also, a second malkut, because since he's a Israel and he's eating the terumah that the Kohen designated at the bottom to eat terumah is also malkut. So Yisrael that would eat this gets two malkut. But if he ate it before we started, so if he just picks up the fig and he eats it, how many malkut does he get? One for eating tevel, eating from a fruit that has not yet been designated. So you have an obligation to when you want to eat the fruit to first separate terumot masrot. Okay, so one tevel. Now I start designating. Now I made a part of it terumah. Once I made a part of it terumah, it's designated. The minute it's designated, if I ate that fruit, now already I get malkut. Where are we heading with this? Anyone realize? You already kind of picked at it a little bit, Stanley. What we're basically saying here is that the minute I say this part of the fig is terumah, now you just told me that if I eat the fig, I ate terumah. Why? Just because it was designated. Not because I gave it to the Kohen.
Punishment changes.
No. Yes, the punishment changes. But what did I need in order for that thing? Designation. So you see that I why when it comes over here do I have to get to Jerusalem? And I don't have to arrive in the walls of Jerusalem. Just the statement that this would be the ikar, proving from here, because the statement that the bottom is terumah is already enough. Now the Gemara is going to say, the Gemara says that the reason why the Yisrael, why does he get malkut, is because he's in Yerushalayim, and therefore he gets malkut. Okay, so he didn't get maaser any problems. But if you would be in the givulin, if you would be outside of Yerushalayim, so our case in the Mishnah is when he's in Jerusalem. If he would be in givulin, if he would be outside of Yerushalayim, he should have to get 3 malkut. Why? Because of maaser sheni. That's what the Braita is implying. And here, he didn't. If he'd been in the givulin, he didn't even get to Jerusalem. So you see from the Braita that just the designation itself is already enough to be able to give you malkut for maaser sheni. Afal gav delora pnei choma. Even though you didn't see Yerushalayim, what's the answer?
You can designate it outside of Yerushalayim.
No, you already said the answer. The Braita said,
You don't ever need to go inside. designated?
That's the question. Rabbi Yochanan says, what you only get Malkut once you went inside. We have a Braita. The Braita says that if you're in Jerusalem, you only get 2 Malkut. You don't get lashes for Maaser Sheni. You see here that just the designation is enough to be able to give you Malkut for Maaser Sheni. So it's not about the walls of Yerushalayim.
It's about the designation.
It's about the designation. So that undoes Rabbi Yochanan, because it's talking about over here where he's in Ranana, and we're giving him lashes for Maaser Sheni, and you see he didn't have to go to Yerushalayim. Answer is, who told you? Maybe the Braita, which tells us that he's in Ranana, means that he already went to Yerushalayim with his fig, and then he brought his fig
And then he
back home to Ranana, which is exactly your case. Okay, so Stanley, you're all over this, like a blanket, okay?
By accident.
That's why I was smiling. Says the Gemara, Da'ayli v'afki. It's talking about where this guy drawing the lines on the fig, our fellow, he took the fig to Yerushalayim. It saw the face of Yerushalayim, so to speak. Now he's back home, Bigvulin. Then he would get 3 levels of Malkut. But there's no proof. Says the Gemara, Yachi, if that's true, my lememra. What is the Braita telling me? There's no chidush in the Braita. So why did it need to state the case? If you were to tell me that the reason why the Braita was in existence was to teach me that the designation alone gives you lashes, fine, that's the chidush. What other chidush is there? The Gemara answers, Hacha b'mayaskinan, what are we talking about? Kegon da'elinu bitivlayu. He brought it in Tevel when it's unseparated to Yerushalayim.
He went back without separating it.
He went back without separating, so it saw Jerusalem, but it was never designated and saw Jerusalem. He brought it as a Tevel, it saw Yerushalayim, brings it back to Ranana, now he designates it. The Kasavar and the Braita holds, the Tana who's quoting this Braita, holds Matanot shelo huremu kimi shehuremu damyan. When you have a obligation to separate something, it's as if that thing is already separated. So since the fig visited Jerusalem on its travels, even though you didn't designate it, anything which is going to be designated, but is not yet designated, we look at it as if it was already designated. So in other words, the fact that in the timeline, it visited Jerusalem as an undeclared fig, came back home and was then declared, doesn't stop me from saying that it saw the face of Jerusalem.
You can't say the designation is the Ikar.
No, it's clear that the visiting of Jerusalem is the Ikar,
Right.
but I might have thought that would only be the case if it was post-designation, which makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, why would I imagine that this non-Maaser Rishot Maaser Sheni fruit should become Maaser Shenid, right, just because it visited Jerusalem? I ask you a strange question, by the way, if you want to think about it, just from before we get anywhere in the Gemara. Let's say I have 100 figs, okay? How much do I have to give to Maaser Rishon, Sheni, each one a portion, but not 100. Now I took 100 figs and they saw Jerusalem.
Are they all designated?
Now I went back home. If you told me it's only after designation, fine. But if you tell me that it doesn't miss designation just because I haven't designated it yet, right? So when I came back home now, and I'm eating in Ranana, I can't eat any of them? I was never obligated to separate all of them, for sure not. Let's say minimally, at least 60, 59 1/60ths, right? Then you separate Terumah, then you separate Maaser Ani. Separate all you want. There's going to be a large portion that I get. So now, any fig that I eat, I get lashes for?
In general, are you allowed to eat from your produce before separating Maaser?
Technically, no.
So then there's your answer, right?
No, that's what I'm asking you. Because now that I didn't designate and they all saw Jerusalem and you told me it doesn't make a difference if you designated or not, because if it could have been designated, it's considered as if it was designated. So I lost out now, because now every one of these fruits in its undesignated but still is as if its designated status saw the face of Jerusalem, which means I'm now not allowed to eat all of them.
Designate them before you go.
Better designate them, but now I didn't. Is that the case? Is that the halakha? Says the Gemara. V'savar Rav Yossi holds, okay, that's our Braita over here. Matanot shelo hurmu k'mishe hurmu damri. You want to tell me that that's what Rav Yossi holds? That an undesignated thing, if it's supposed to be designated, it's as if it was already designated, okay? V'hatanan, didn't we learn in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Yossi, Lo nechleku ben Shammai or Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel did not argue. Right? Lo nechleku, they did not argue, al perot shelo nigmera melachtan, ve'avru b'Yushalayim. When you have fruits that they did not yet finish the processing, we'll see exactly what that means, okay? But they did not finish, with not finished processing the fruits, and they went through Yerushalayim, okay, and at that point, she yifdeh maaser sheni shelahen v'yachel b'chol makom, that the maaser sheni is allowed to be shifted from the fruit onto the money, and then eaten wherever you want. V'alma nechleku. So where did they argue? Al perot shenigmera melachtan, on a fruit that you did finish the processing, ve'aberu b'Yerushalayim, and at that point it went through Yerushalayim. Bet Shammai omri. What? We're going to get there in a second. Okay? Bet Shammai omri. Bet Shammai says yachzir ma'aseh sheni shelahem ve'achel b'Yerushalayim. Bet Shammai says no. All that fruits, it can't be redeemed because we said already, once it hits Yerushalayim, you can't redeem it onto money anymore. Bet Hillel says, no, still, even though it visited Jerusalem, you still are able to separate that money, separate it onto the money. Why? Because when it visited Jerusalem, the processing was not yet done. And since the processing was not yet done, so the fact that it visited Jerusalem, it was not in its Maaser Sheni state yet. Because you could only separate Maaser Sheni when the processing of the crops is finished. We'll get into exactly what that means in 1 second. Okay? So therefore we have a Machloket Bet Shammai Bet Hillel, but clearly they both hold, like the Gemara said before, that when you have Perot Shelo Nigmera Melachtan, that you did not yet finish the processing, that it doesn't create the status of having visited Jerusalem. So pre-ready Maaser Sheni doesn't become Jerusalem by visiting Jerusalem. When do they argue?
Wait, one more time, the last statement. I lost you.
Pre-processed fruits. So in other words, before you get to the point, I'll just give you the background. When does a person become obligated to separate the tithes? Only from after the harvest is completed. And as an example, it depends on the kind of harvest. But let's say it comes to wheat. I take the wheat, I put it in the silo, I make bundles out of the wheat, I tie up the bundles, now it's finished. Once it's finished, that's when I take maaser. It's not that the second I cut it off from the ground, now we're ready for maaser. It has to be gathered and finished. That's the processing we're speaking about. So before the process is done, Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel agree that if you took maaser to Yerushalayim, it didn't become Jerusalem. Now what are they talking about? They're not talking about to eat from it.
Maaser.
The maaser sheni. What they're asking is, what does it mean Jerusalem in this case?
Designated.
It means, is it Jerusalem to the point where you can't redeem it onto money? In every scenario, we always say that when you separate a maaser sheni, then you put it on the money, and then you're mobile. You don't have to carry all that stuff with you to Jerusalem. Once you took the produce to Jerusalem, you can't now say, okay, I'm going to put this on money, because it's already there. It's already ready to be eaten in that state, okay? So they all agree that before the process is done, once it gets to Yerushalayim, it's already Yerushalayim. However, when do they argue, Perot shenigmera melachtan, you finished the melacha, so it's already ready to be separated. Now you went to Yerushalayim. Bet Shammai holds, even though it's not yet designated, but it's ready to be designated, already. Yachzir Maaser Sheni shelahem v'yachel b'Yerushalayim. It has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. You can't be put there. Bet Hillel holds, no, even though I visited Jerusalem in its ready state, still it doesn't become Maaser Sheni to the point where it can't be redeemed. And if you hold So Rabbi Yossi, who is the person who tells us this Braita, is telling us the two different opinions. Which opinion? Beruchim Abaim. Did you just come straight off the plane?
Yes.
Shema. This is like the ultimate class of Mesirut Nefesh. Ya'eni, I'm very proud of you. Okay. The Pasuk says, so the Rabbi Yossi, who is the one who's communicating this whole Braita, just gave us two opinions. The opinion of Bet Shammai, the opinion of Bet Hillel. In every machloket, Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel, except for very specific cases that we expressly state, who does the halakha follow?
Hillel.
Bet Hillel. Until the time of Mashiach, when we're going to revert and the halakha will follow Bet Shammai. Okay? But for right now, the opinion always follows Bet Hillel, except for the cases that Bet Shammai was able to do. Fascinating Gemara for another time. Gemara tells us there was one day, Bet Hillel people were out doing arts and crafts. They were doing something else. Bet Shammai gathered together. They saw that they had the majority, and they just ruled on all the halachot that they could. And they got them in the books.
Wow, that's great.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, so on that day, they got in all the, okay. But other than that, the general consensus is that Bet Hillel is the halacha. So if Rabbi Yossi is telling you that there's a machlokes Bet Shammai Bet Hillel, which side is he going to hold like?
Hillel.
Bet Hillel. What did Bet Hillel just tell us? That that if the produce is already finished being processed, but not yet designated, and it gets to Jerusalem, what happens to that produce? It becomes Jerusalem. And we're not talking about over here for lashes, we're talking about over here for redemption. But it would seem clear that Rabbi Yossi would have to hold that it becomes Jerusalem. It's undesignated, right? But it becomes that way. So if that's the case, you see that Bet Hillel holds that the lack of designation is enough to make it not Jerusalem. So it can't be that Rabbi Yossi holds like you just said he holds. Amar Rabbi answers, Mechitza lecho deoraita. This is wild. The wall that obligates a person, or that limits a person, or that creates a status of Jerusalem, lecho, with regards to eating, deoraita. That is from the Torah, okay? And with regards to the deoraita of eating your maaser sheni, okay? The walls of Yerushalayim create the halacha from the Torah. Mechitza leklot derabanan. But once I walk into the walls with regards to saying that that the maaser sheni visited this place, that's only midrabanan. You got me? V'chi gazu rabanan. When did the Chachamim make the gezerah at the walls of Yerushalayim? They swallow you up. They create the status of maaser sheni. Ki ite beine, when the maaser sheni is already in its form of designation. Betivle lo gazu rabanan. When it comes to tevel, whether it's not yet been designated, the Chachamim never made the gezerah that the walls of Yerushalayim they encompass you. It creates that status. Now, that sounds like a wild thing. Like, am I in Jerusalem or not? If I'm in Jerusalem, or if the walls of Jerusalem got me, that with regards, if I take it out and I eat it, I get lashes. How could it not get me with regards to making it unredeemable because it visited Jerusalem? Says Rabbi Yossi, I'm makpid on a case of deoraita, but not makpid. I'm not making that gezerah when it comes to the case of redemption. Now, I think anyone else in the world would have a problem understanding this, except for us, because we already learned Masechet Makkot, and we learned that the walls of a city that encompass and envelop the accidental murderer, certain laws of the city apply for one law but not for the other. We already saw this. When does it save him, right? At what point is he able to kill him? So we saw the idea that the status given by the walls of a city to designate a city for a certain law might be different when it comes to one thing than when it comes to another. Okay? All good so far? Yes? All right. Ravina says, let's try and use another understanding besides for the explanation that we have of Rabbi Yossi in the Braita. Okay? Ravina Amar, what is that third? If you remember, we had that first case with the Kohen drawing the lines on his fig. Remember that? So we had that case, and the Gemara seemed to imply that there's three. That the reason why he gets 2 lashes is because he's not in Yerushalayim. Because he's in Yerushalayim. If he was not in Yerushalayim, then he gets 3 lashes for Maaseh Sheni, even though it would seem like it's just a designation, and it didn't yet visit Yerushalayim. The Gemara says, "Kegon kitle bekanya." We're talking about a case where he was walking with the stick over his back that we mentioned earlier. And if you remember, the Gemara that we said earlier says, if a guy is walking and he's got the stick with the little stuff on his back hanging behind him, and the Gemara says, what's the halakha? Rav Papa asked, "Nakit le bekanye." He's got the Maaseh Sheni on a stick behind him. Do we look at the load with him or not with him? He's in the wall, the thing is behind him. Do we say that the stick follows him or not? And we answered Teku, that we have no resolution. Says Ravina, this is the resolution. The case of the Braita is where the guy was walking to the walls of Yerushalayim, he's got the stick behind him, and you asked me, what's the chidush? The chidush is that we're talking about that case, and it's considered as if he's in. The tifshot ba'aya to Rav Papa, and that's why he only gets 2 sets of malkut, bigvulin, birushalayim, but he would have gotten 3 sets bigvulin. Says the Mishnah continues. Now, again, each time we're reading a Mishnah, we're finding more things that a person gets malkut for. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Hakoreach korcha berosho. Someone makes a karachat on his head. We are not talking over here about male pattern baldness. We're also not talking about a guy who stops using Rogaine. Hakoreach korcha means that he literally takes a razor or whatever and he makes a bald spot on his head. And we'll see exactly what the case is, but let's just review the pasuk. The pasuk says that a person in a state of mourning is prohibited from making a bald spot on his head. Why is he prohibited from doing that? The Torah did not want the person to do an excessive show of mourning for the dead. Why? Because an excessive show of mourning for the dead. Rabbi, I'm just finishing my Gemara class from before. Okay? We have about 2 minutes left. Is that okay? Right? An excessive show of mourning, what would that do? It would illustrate that the person, not only is he said that the person's gone, the lack of emunah in the world to come. It's as if he feels like the person is gone forever. So the koreach korcha on a dead over a dead person, that excessive act of mourning. By the way, there's another thing as well where people would tear their flesh. Those are the 2 things. Hakoreach korcha berosho, someone makes a bald spot on his head for a show of mourning. Mekif pe'at rosho, or if someone is mekif pe'at rosho, what does that mean? He cuts off the pe'ot of around his head. So let's say you shaved up here. Now the pe'ot of a person, we'll see, is going to be the mashchit pe'at zikno, or someone who destroys pe'at zikno, the pe'ah of his beard. There are 5 different spots of pe'ah. One is up here, okay? One is down here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? On both sides. And the bottom as well. All of this is considered part of the pe'ot, pe'at harosh and pe'at hazakan. A person is not allowed to destroy that. What we're talking about over here is not in mourning. This is talking about using a razor on that spot, okay? And shaving the hair with a razor. Also asur. Maybe, I don't know if the Gemara over here is going to get so far into that, right? But we're not allowed to do it through a goy either, because you're still, the isur is in being mekif, okay? And so therefore you're not allowed to do it. Now, I just want to illustrate 2 different things. One point is in cutting it very, very short. So let's say, as an example, I take an electric razor and I go all the way up to here. I have no hair here. Have I done the isur? Yes. Okay? Because it doesn't matter if it's with a blade or with the scissors. You're not allowed to go so thin that you're shaving it, let's say, to the skin. So if I go skin all the way to here, right? If using asur. There's a separate bit which is even the tiniest amount using a single blade. The difference between an electric shaver and a regular and a knife is because one is cutting with one blade, one is cutting with a scissor motion, and that's where the difference is. Says the Gemara, or someone who tears his flesh, even if it's just one, for a met for someone who's dead, hayav, he gets malkut for that soret srita. Okay, Rabbi, I don't want to make you wait anymore. Okay, Baruch Hanai Leolam, Amen ve'amen. We'll continue Be'ezrat Hashem next week.